things just to give as quick background is I'm technically not in CX anymore, but I think once you're there, you never leave it. I've kind of migrated over to this other side, which is executive search. And I'll tell you just really briefly about kind of how I got there and then why this topic becomes so relevant. So, having done essentially everything within customer experience from marketing to operations and everything in between, what I started to come to realize at the end of it was that the most successful organizations are the ones that actually get CX from the highest of levels within the company, that the C-suite actually understands the value of customer experience. And what it also started me to help me realize was it's really about the culture that the people at that C level start to instill within the organization and the employee experience that they build that really allows a company to flourish. And so I got passionate about understanding what is it about leaders that makes them more likely to be excited about customer experience initiatives and to kind of buy into it. So with that background, I've straddled both sides of this, right? I've been on the side from a CX leader that's trying to get somebody on the C-suite to love my idea and to fund it. And I've also been on the other side, which is as an executive hearing pitches and now as well finding those leaders that are going to be hearing some of these pitches from their CX team members. So hopefully that dual side gives a little more perspective. The other thing I wanted to share is I am all about questions. I don't want this to be me yapping at you guys for the next 45 minutes. This is really about us having a dialogue. So please jump in with questions. There's a chat that's open on the side. So if you can put your questions into the chat, we'll go and we'll address them as they come in. If you want to come off mic and ask a question, I'm totally great with that too. I actually prefer that. So leave it up to you guys. All right. So without any further ado, so excited everybody's here. All right. So let's start off with a stat that I think is troubling, concerning, but really honest. And that is that this comes from Forrester, and they found that 54% of CX leaders cannot prove the ROI of their initiatives. And like I told you, I've been on this side of the table. I've actually been in a position where I could not get the leaders of an organization to buy in what needed to be done. And it was one of those where I knew in my gut of guts that this was the right thing to do. I just couldn't get them to do it. I couldn't get them to see the light. And I spent a lot of time reflecting on that. And part of what we're going to do today is share on some of those reflections that I've had. So what concerns me about this is that we are all smart and capable and driven individuals that want to get good stuff done. And if 50% of us can't get it done, like it's just not going to help the companies we work with. So today, that's what I'm going to help us all focus on, which is let's put together a great framework in order to be able to help convince more of those C-level executives to get these things done. Because we know these things are not just supplements to the business. This is mission critical medicine to the business. If we don't get our C-level execs bought into this, the health of the organization is going to suffer. So how do we do that? So we're going to talk today. Here's how I'm going to break it out for you. We're going to talk a little bit about why executive buy-in is so hard, what the C-suite actually prioritizes, why siloed data is your enemy. I think we've all experienced it. How to translate the insights that we have into business impact, and then practical tactics to get your initiative funded. Because if we're not practical today, you're not going to walk away with anything that's going to be helpful. So, of course, very much focused on that. All right. So with that, I'm going to start off with a question for everybody. We're going to do a quick poll here. And our poll is, how many of you have had a great idea stall because you couldn't connect it to revenue or cost?
All right, so far it's 100% yes.
We got one answer.
Yeah, just one answer, yes.
All right, I'm going to say yes too, and 100%. Then we'll have two.
Yep.
And while you guys are filling this out, I would love if somebody would volunteer a story, maybe a brief one of an example of a time that they had an idea stall because they couldn't connect it to revenue or cost.
Yeah, this is Mark. I'll throw one out there because it happened with the company that I just left in June. I'll I'll make long story quick, but there was a lot of talk and almost pressure from above across the company to do very specific type of AI. They were kind of putting the solution before the problem, right? So it was like they were so focused on generative AI and handheld and stuff. And I'm in product, not CX, but I consider CX broader than just the role of CX. And also a big believer going out to the marketplace. So I went out and I would go and talk to customers about all different things, trying to find their problems. And I ended up talking to about 20 customers and about 60 people within those 20 customers. And I would do this exercise where I'd ask them to tell me what are like the 12 biggest problems you have, and then ask them to rank it. And out of 60 people, one person ranked what our strategy was as a top 5 problem. And one of the top 5 problems, in fact, it was a top 2 problem consistently, was predictive, being able to predict things. And it was hospital-based software. I won't go into all the details. And I even wrote up kind of a mini business case, and we could get to that, Michelle, because I didn't feel like, as we know, doing a business case is a tremendous amount of work, and I didn't want to put all this work in if they're just going to say, yeah, we're not doing that right now. And that's kind of the response I got even initially was, yeah, we're not going to do that right now. We're focused on generative AI and this and that. And then I started doing the TAM, but I didn't really get into the revenue. And I don't know if you're going to talk to this, because it was kind of like, here's a great idea. And not only that, but it is something that's being demanded by the marketplace. We were behind the curve. This was a leapfrog idea, in my opinion. And they just weren't willing to bite off because that just wasn't, on the docket for what the senior leadership wanted to do.
Yeah, that's a great example, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll definitely, and if I don't get to it, just poke me later, but we'll definitely talk about how do you, when it comes to other executives that are helping you get stuff done, in addition to those that need to buy in, how do you get them to prioritize the projects that they have on their to-do list and not just think of your project as some incremental thing to add to it, and B, something that they do off the side of their desk that they don't actually apply enough resources to. So we'll talk about both of those things. I thought that was a great example. Thanks for sharing. All right, so part of the challenge, and this is interesting, Mark, because you clearly weren't going after these types of metrics, but I think very often what we struggle with within the CX space is, thank you for sharing the total of the poll, everybody. Okay, great, good. This is a relevant conversation then. What we're challenged with is there's really a translation gap. The folks within CX are talking about NPS and CSAT and maybe some of the other metrics, whether it's having to do very specifically within contact center. And if you're in CS, maybe it's ARR or other pieces. That now starts to have a little bit more of a financial pull to it. But what you really need to understand is that in the business C-level suite, we're talking about revenue growth, cost efficiency, brand reputation. Those are the 3 things that you need to hit. And it's that difference in language in terms of what we're talking about and the inability to translate the one into the other that I have very often seen being one of the problems. So we're going to talk about how do we actually get to translate the one into the other, because that is actually a very sticky widget. And you have to, I think that one of the other really important points to keep in mind is when you're having these conversations with executives, it's not that they don't care about the customer, not at all, but they just can't see that clear link that you can see between the project you're talking about and the value to the customer, and therefore the financial value to the organization. So connecting those dots and pulling that thread through is really what needs to happen. So we'll talk about how we can close that translation gap. Because ultimately, business speaks one simple language, and it's just dollars. That's what it is. So if you can't translate what you're trying to do into dollars, well, then you're not going to be able to get the buy-in. And there are 2 ways to talk about the value to an organization. I'll get a little bit more into it later on. But one is how are we saving parts of the business from additional costs, things that are potentially breaking? How can we do that? And then there's, Mark, a little bit more of what you're talking about, which is the future state. And how can we protect ourselves and build a deeper and wider competitive moat that has future value to it? And it's that both of those parts of a coin are really important when we start presenting ideas to the C-suite, that it isn't just one-sided about, hey, I can save you money, but to also think about what is it about the future state, what is it the potential revenue that it can bring in, and how to be able to present that idea as well. All right. So, and I think, look, on this slide, I think it pretty much speaks to itself in terms of those three pieces that I was talking about. But when you think about how you're going to align some of that, the case that you're going to present to your executives, you really want it to have, you really want to have it fall into one of these three buckets. Revenue growth, super clear what that is, right? Cost efficiency, just what we said. Brand reputation gets really interesting because that to me is where CX shines. Because when you do brand reputation really well, you help become the organic growth engine to your organization. This is where you get customers to be so excited about the product that you have built, the service that you are delivering, that it's not just that they buy more of it or they expand what they're doing with you. It's that they also tell other people about how fantastic you are. And there's a value in that that actually ties back into your revenue growth. Because if you think about that, that becomes a marketing engine for your organization. And it's the least expensive and most valuable part of your marketing engine. So again, I point this out because it's a great way to think about when you're positioning your expansion, whatever it is, your project that you want to do, that you're thinking about what could the impact be upon brand reputation and how could that help us as a business in terms of either lowering our marketing acquisition cost, getting into a new market because of the brand reputation component of it. Oops, sorry, got a little eager. One of the challenges that we have, and I think it's part of why this problem is so persistent, there are two aspects to it. And one is this data piece. The second piece is the emotional piece, and I'll get into that. The data piece, the problem that we have as most organizations is that data is siloed. It is siloed into its functional group. Marketing has its data all about what it's like for acquisition, but they have no insight into whether the customer that I just spent $200 acquiring actually brings any value to the organization. Maybe that's like the cheapest customer that they have with really narrow margins, versus knowing that a marketing acquisition that maybe they only did $30 for, but because it was just the right target market, actually has a profitability that is so much greater than some of the other activity that they're doing. It's that lack of connectivity that is a problem when it comes to how to present the value of an initiative to the C-level suite. So one of the first things that's really important to do is to figure out how to break through those silos, because nobody sees the entire customer life cycle except for you. You have this visibility and this view into how does this one thing that happened, whether it's on the expectation setting side, which is to me marketing and everything that happens on the upfront, has been now delivered on, which is the expectation delivery side, which is all of the operations components of it. Tying the customer thread through both of those and being able to bring to the forefront, hey, when we sell to our clients this way, we end up having a problem because we operationally cannot deliver on that. You can now begin to have a much more meaningful conversation within the organization because you've been able to pull that data through and come through with that conversation. So quick pause for another question. How many have had challenges with siloed data?
Oops, sorry, it's flashing. It's good. There it is.
That's okay.
These must be leading questions.
Is everyone going to go, yeah?
Yeah, it's looking like 100% again that they have.
Well, I don't want to get ahead of, you may have this, but are you going to address like when it's the senior level person, whether that's the CEO, CRO, that is driving the bad behavior, and how to work around that?
Oh, so in KPI setting potentially?
KPI, and then kind of using the data, let's say not improperly, but using being too narrow focused, so that they're not seeing the bigger picture of, trying to acquire the big whale who they've been going after at the expense of long-term viability, things like that.
Yeah.
But basically, where it's like the person who's driving the bad behavior is the one at the very top.
Yeah.
And then how do you kind of deal with that?
How do you work through that? I do not have that in here. We can talk about it though, because it's really important.
My last role, that was a big problem.
Yep. Okay. Happy to do that. All right, great. Are we done with the poll?
Yep, we
actually
have one, have not two. All right, here's.
Oh, I have not. That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm curious about those that have not encountered siloed data. That's pretty cool. I'd like to know what company that is. So let's talk a little bit about how can you close the gap that arises between the, hey, I have this one way of talking about customer experience and the value of customer experience, and translating that into something that's more meaningful to the rest of the C-level suite. So this is just a very simplified example, right? But here's something where very often I've come into organizations where the head of CX comes in and says, look, I'm going to raise your NPS by 10 points. Here's how I'm going to raise it, and blah, blah, blah. Or I've just raised it, or this project's going to raise it by 10 points. And eyes glaze over on the C-level suite because they have no idea whether or not that's meaningful. They don't know what the value of that is. They don't know if they should really care about it. Some of us have been trained more than others to think that NPS is valuable, but it's not like there's some place out in the internet where everybody looks as a customer, hey, who's got the highest NPS rating? Let me go do business with them. That's not how it operates. So it's really important to be able to translate that into financially, what does that mean? And here's just a very simple example, right, of what would be better to be able to say is, this protects 25 million in lifetime value by reducing churn, as an example. I'll give you one very specifically. Customer lifetime value is a metric that gets used more often in subscription-based marketing. Subscription-based businesses. My experience has been, though, it's actually applicable to a lot more industries. And I've brought it into retail, I've brought it into manufacturing, and I've helped organizations understand very specifically, what is the value of losing a current client that you have? You can also obviously do this from a customer perspective when you're thinking about a direct-to-consumer or a B2C type of business. But on the B2C side, it's incredibly valuable to understand how much your customers bring, every single one of them, to the table in terms of whether it's profitability, whether it's revenue that's coming in, and understanding that very clearly so that you can start to talk about, hey, by doing this project, I'm going to be able to retain this customer who has XYZ value. I can build a competitive moat around them, and I can make sure that they don't leave. That's one of the best ways to be able to demonstrate to the C-suite this whole concept of churn and reduction of churn, or reduction of loss of customer, that protectionist piece. Because at the end of the day, and I think most of us know this already, but for some reason the C-level doesn't always respond to it, an existing customer is much more valuable than acquiring a brand new customer. Figuring out how to be able to leverage that existing customer, do the land and expand type of a model with an existing customer, is more valuable than acquiring lots of customers and then having a leaky bucket and losing all of those customers on the back end. So if you can help to demonstrate that a project that you're putting together brings value because it retains a customer that you currently have, or maybe it's a segment of customers in a B2B market, a B2C market, that provides some substantiation, some financial substantiation to the projects that you're working on. So one of the things that one of the first things actually I did when I came into HomeServe happened to be a subscription business, so much easier, but it's a home warranty company. And I came in, and I think it was the second meeting of the, I'll call it the executive team meeting, the senior business team meeting. And I asked a simple question, which was, what is the value of 1% change in our retention rate, in our customer retention rate? And the room went silent. Nobody actually knew what the value of that was. And that was fascinating to me because it felt like without understanding what the value of losing a client would be, how could we know how to best deploy our efforts when it came to, and I happened to at the time when I came in, I oversaw all of our account management team and all of our existing customer relationships. Without having that piece of information, how could I make informed decisions? And what it came to be was that a change in 1% retention rate of our customers ended up having a $10 million value. So by pushing the finance team to be able to calculate what that number was, I was able to then more confidently go into some of those meetings. Sorry, I think somebody might be off mute and speaking. I don't know if there's a question out there though. That I was more confidently able to go into some of those meetings and talk about, this is the project that we should be doing and here's why, because we heard client XYZ, Mark, back to your point, I heard client XYZ tell me that this was a really important capability that we don't have yet, or that it's not functioning the way it's supposed to be functioning, and they're looking at another vendor to be able to provide that value to them. An example that's probably more familiar for those of you that work in the contact center, and this is one that I spent a lot of time on, are the conversations around, remember when I said those 3 buckets of how you want to present some of the information to your C-suite? One of them is on cost efficiency and reducing costs. And I so often hear when I have conversations with businesses, particularly with those within their CS space, I so often hear them tell me, look, we're looking for ways to be able to reduce handle time, if not completely deflect a phone call. And the problem is, and this goes back to how people don't really tie data together. The problem with that is, from an operational perspective, that will look fantastic. You will all of a sudden reduce your handle time from 3 minutes to 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds are gold. That's all money in the bank, and everybody's super excited and jumping up and down. But the homework that nobody did was to understand whether or not that rushed resolution had an impact down the road. Did it actually result in additional phone calls? Did it result in a customer going online and complaining about how they felt rushed in their transaction and interaction with your organization? Which, by the way, that hits your reputational bucket, which has a lot of costs associated with it. So it's very important that as you think about some of these efficiency opportunities, and Mark, again, to your point around AI, first of all, think about the problem you're actually trying to solve before figuring out what's the tool you're going to use to solve it. And then secondarily, start to think about whether or not the outcome is actually going to, in the grand scheme of things, as you think about the customer lifetime value, is it actually going to bring greater value to that customer? A lot of these friction points that exist within particularly the contact center actually have good financial value to them. I know so often executives talk about, I want a frictionless experience. Well, the problem if you make everything totally frictionless is you can lose the opportunity to do a cross-sell or an upsell, or have an engaging conversation with a client to better understand what their needs are for future sales opportunities. So sometimes friction actually has financial value. It's just not immediately available and visible to you. So this is something where I think it's really important as you think about the customer lifetime value metric. These little vignettes of things that we've probably all come across can be beneficial to be able to better understand, how do I apply that customer lifetime value to this conversation so that the organization doesn't make short-term, short-sighted decisions that help us today, but actually hurt us down the road. So now that we've talked a lot about, or some about data and the importance of having integrated data and truly being able to pull those threads through. And if anybody wants to jump on and ask me about, well, how do you do that? I know that data's here and we don't have it all. I'm happy to have that conversation too, because it's important in the roles that we're in to be able to figure out how to be able to get that data into a repository that we can actually leverage and be able to pull that customer thread through. But that's one piece of how you actually get C-level buy-in. Data is not the only thing, because as the quote here states, data makes you think, but it doesn't make you act. Emotions make you act. So we have to bring a second level into our approach of how do we present ideas to the C-level to get them to act. Because part of the problem that we have as CX leaders is very often we do not own a P&L. We don't have a budget. We don't have direct control over the things that impact the customer experience, but we see them all very clearly. And so it's important for us to be able to really figure out how to influence others in the organization and get them to get the buy-in, to have buy-in on the projects that we think are important, and for them to actually then do what we know needs to get done. So the way to be able to do this, the way to get to that emotive component of how do you essentially sell your idea in, is a three-tiered approach that I've taken. And part of the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I did not do this well in my career at the very beginning of my CX role. And I learned over time, this is the secret to the sauce. So I'm not telling you because I did it perfectly from the beginning. It's because I fell down a lot of times. And this is what I have come to learn over time, and what ends up being really successful. So I've gotten my data point. I'm going to come back to that. What I now need to do is I need to be able to leverage my relationship with someone to be able to bring that data point and sell a story around it. But I can't sell the story unless I know what's important to that person. So here's the three-step approach that you get to in order to understand what is going to motivate and drive somebody to want to work on a project with you. The very first one is build a personal connection. This sounds like super basic, but this is, if you're going to be working with the marketing team, get to know your peer on the marketing team, get to know the most senior person on the marketing team, put a 30-minute meeting on their calendar and have it be mostly about personal stuff. Understand who they are, excuse me. Do they have a family? Do they have kids? Where do they live? All of that kind of stuff. See if a lot of that has to do with how do you come to that conversation? The number one way to get somebody to open up and be more emotive and personable with you is for you to first start that. And it's about vulnerability yourself. So one of the things I do very often is in my email communications, I send out a, hey, how are you? I usually do what I call bookending. I'll do it on the end of a weekend or the beginning of a weekend. I'll either say, hey, how was your weekend? Did you do anything fun? Or if it's on the other end, hey, got any fun plans for the weekend? But I don't stop there. I then put this is I'm being vulnerable, sharing something with you. I then put, this weekend, I hung out with my daughter who had a gymnastics meet and watched her compete and struggle through a hard time. Something about my weekend, or if it's going to be the weekend I'm going into, hey, I'm really excited about going apple picking. It's the fall season here and it's my favorite time. You will be shocked at the number of people that respond to just that little bit of personalization in that communication, and they will actually share with you what they did on the last weekend or what they're going to do on the coming weekend. And they won't just say, I'm doing well, hope you're doing well. And that will be the thread that you can now use to start to expand your personal relationship with that person. So it's an incredibly effective technique to be able to do that. Once you've built that personal relationship, which is your foundation of trust, now the next level of conversation you want to have with this person is you want to understand what are their personal work goals. So if you're having a conversation with the VP of marketing, maybe they want to be CMO in 2 years, or maybe they want to pivot completely and they're really excited about a narrow part of marketing and they want to do more around rev ops, or they want to go more into BD in general. Understanding where somebody wants to go into their career helps you in terms of how you tell the story around your data. Because ultimately, again, you're going to take that nugget of data and you're going to wrap it in the story that's relevant to this person. And that's how you're going to be able to get buy-in. Then the next tier, and this is the final one, but the next tier is to understand what are this person's goals in their role today? What is going to be what they're going to be bonused on? What are their bonusable metrics? What are the KPIs? What are the OKRs that they have in front of them? And understand those numbers really, really well. Capture that information somewhere, whether it's just in a Google Doc that you have, or you've got some kind of a fancy spreadsheet that you can keep all of that information in. Because now, once I understand what it is that they are trying to achieve personally, as well as what they're trying to achieve from a business perspective, I can now take my data point and I can now tell a story around it that is going to help them solve their problems, not just help solve my problems. I'm going to pause here. I saw that there are a couple of comments in the chat. I don't know if there are any questions. I can't actually see the chat and at the same time be presenting. So if anybody wants to jump off and ask the question.
Yeah, mine was more of a comment just on what you said earlier. I think my experience has always been getting in with the salespeople and understanding how they're compensated is especially important, because how they're compensated is how they're going to sell. So for example, and I've had this in a couple of places where like, how is the company approaching, let's say, a new product launch, right? If the way I always put it as a product person is $1 of my product equal to $1 of somebody else's product? Meaning, if they have a huge briefcase of products and they're being commissioned more heavily on one versus the other, then what are we doing to either, and the goal is to spread out the wealth, then what are we doing as CX, product marketing, et cetera, to help them with that or to change it?
Yep.
And then also, how are they commissioned? Meaning, are they commissioned on gross sale, ARR? Are they commissioned? Is it I work in healthcare where, you could have up to 9 or 10 month implementations. Are they only commissioned once they're live? All those things I think play into it. And that's how you kind of build it with sales, because they could be your best friend or your worst enemy.
Yeah, Mark, I think that's such a good point. And actually it's worth leaning into that, because I think if you take this approach, right, this is what I did at Wayfair. I had conversations. So at Wayfair, I'm sitting at the center of CX, and I'm getting all of the noise from all of the customers. Built a phenomenal VOC, was able to get structured and unstructured data. And then what I came to realize is it's a problem with operations. It's a problem with our acquisition team of, furniture companies. It's a problem with our marketing. It's a problem with all these different departments. So I got friendly with everybody across the board that touched the customer experience, that had an impact on the customer experience, which is everybody. And it then gave me a line of sight into something that was absolutely fascinating, which was there were places where the KPIs, and maybe I'll move away from KPIs because really there should only be a few of them, from the OKRs or from the goals, that were not aligned across the organization and actually were in direct conflict with one another. And that's something really important that as CX professionals, when we do this exercise of getting to really know all of the other leaders in the organization and what they're trying to achieve, we have a line of sight into something that very few people within the organization do. And that is, are the goals that one group has in alignment or in conflict with another group? And I think, you brought a point there. I consulted with a company where the marketing team was being driven to push everybody into digital sales, significantly less expensive. They wanted to have that lowering in cost. But the BD team was being spiffed on and supported on all of their transactions that happened on the phone and their closing of those transactions on the phone. But the marketing team was pulling everything out of the phone and pushing it into a digital channel. So those goals were in direct conflict with one another, which caused conflict within the organization in general. And when you can start to identify some of those friction points around the goals of the organization and bring those to the high levels, to the C-level and say, hey, we've got a problem because we've got conflicting goals. Let's have a conversation around which goal is more important, what's the right goal overarchingly for the strategy of this organization, for how we want to present ourselves going forward, for the North Star that we're trying to achieve. That's then where we can add a lot of value to the organization as well.
Yeah, because salespeople are always going to sell what they know and what's easiest and quickest. And if what you're doing is let's say it, like with AI is a great example, right? So many people don't understand AI, so there's a big education curve there. So if they have all these other things to sell that they've been selling for 10 years, they're not going to focus on what they have to educate and what's going to take a lot longer for somebody to buy.
Yeah, for sure. So let me give you guys a quick example of what this sounds like when you start taking this approach of the career connection, the performance connection, and you tie that into the data that you have. So I might get a data point. Again, this is an example from Wayfair. I might get a data point that tells me that we have a problem in terms of the marketing expectation setting that's happening. Marketing is telling customers on the upfront, on the website, when they're purchasing a piece of furniture, that they're going to get that furniture in 2 days. But we actually have data that tells us that they're not going to get that furniture for at least 4 days, if not 7 days. But the problem that marketing has is, well, if I put 4 or 7 days, I'm going to lose that person and they're going to go to Amazon. So what I ended up doing was I took that data point and I said, but we have so many complaints that come from this. Here's the volume of complaints that I get. Here's the reputational impact that it has, because as you know, now people aren't just talking amongst themselves in terms of something being a problem with the company. They take their megaphone of social media and they go on, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, X, I guess, anywhere else, and they will blast a company. And the challenge of blasting a company in social media, the implications of that is it has a direct cost for your marketing organization, because now your marketing organization has to spend that much more money to overcome the reputational impact. And in addition to that, they have to spend that much more money to convince the customers that were unhappy to purchase product again and potentially purchase more product. So there are some very direct financial impacts. So if you can now take that piece of information that you have of, hey, we're getting lots of customer complaints around the expectation setting that's happening, and I can understand that marketing has a goal to be able to reduce their CAC, their cost of acquisition per customer. I can go back and I can say to them, hey, look, I've got some data that shows that those customers that complain about not receiving their product in a timely fashion, that just those customers, forget their friends and family and the complete strangers that they know on social media, that just those people, they now, when you try to resell them something, are 2 times more expensive to be able to get them to purchase something again. Well, now that's a really meaningful conversation to have with the marketing department, because CAC is something that's super important to them. I have taken a problem that is technically a service problem. I get lots of complaints. They're costly because they land in my contact center and I have to resolve them with a human. And I've now wrapped it into the conversation that's meaningful and a story that's meaningful to that C-level executive, because I understand what they are trying to achieve. So I'm not giving them an added thing to do on their list. What I'm doing is I'm taking something and I'm saying, this is already on your list of things to do. Let's figure out a way to do it. Now, here's the second piece of that conversation that needs to happen. The second piece is to say, hey, our team has brainstormed a couple of solutions, but you guys are the subject matter experts. I'd love to sit down with you and hear what you think about some of our ideas, or work collaboratively with you to come up with some solutions to this problem. And that way, you're not telling them how to do their job. You're going to kickstart the conversation on their side because you're coming prepared with some possible solutions for them. And now they can take action on what you have seen to be a major problem in the organization. So it's a great way to be able to set up let me tell the story, but I'm not just going to leave it there. I want to get stuff done. Let me tell you and talk about collaboratively with you how we might be able to solve this problem. And then you can talk about resource allocation as well when you're in that conversation. I'm going to pause there for any questions or comments. All right. The next piece that is mission critical to getting stuff done and getting buy-in from C-level executives is don't go for the biggest project, the most complicated project first. When you start coming to executives and you've got all of your insights around all of the possible things that you can do in your organization, you should really start to think about, how do I map those out to think about prioritization? I use a quadrant methodology, which is really around level of effort at its most basic level, level of effort, and then value to the company and value to the customer. And when I map across that and I understand what the level of effort is, and I can understand what the value is to the customer, then I start to think about, what is it from a locus of control that I can get done? If this is a problem that requires 20 different departments to get engaged to be able to solve, that should not be the first problem that I tackle. If it only involves one department, and within that one department, maybe it's 2 or 3 people that I need to collaborate with, that's a really good problem to solve. If I can solve that problem and try to find something that you can solve relatively quickly, right? 1 to 2 weeks is fabulous, highly unlikely, but fabulous. Maybe a month to get something done. Then celebrate it within the organization. Let people know what you've been able to achieve working collaboratively with others. Now that you're able to do that, you then can have conversations about the larger initiatives, but you have to build that trust and momentum first, because otherwise, if you go with a really big problem at everybody, the really costly one that needs to get solved, like the one I went after was, we need a new CRM. Okay, well, nobody's going to jump on that bandwagon. That's incredibly expensive, impacts so many different groups. I have to coordinate with all different kinds of people. That's a dead on arrival idea. But if instead I go and I say, hey, here's this one project, relatively small, I can get that done. And then I do another one and another one and another one. I build trust among all of those leaders in the C-level. And they say, hey, when Michelle comes to me with a problem that needs to be solved, it's a real problem and she gets it done. Next time she comes to me, my threshold starts to lower in terms of how much she has to convince me, because I've built trust over time with her. And so that's a really important component of how we can get those wins done, and be able to deliver more. So in summary, the way to be able to really get buy-in is, one, know your audience, really understand them well in terms of their personal goals from a career perspective, and then their goals that they're measured against within the organization. And as you start to think about, how do I package the information that I have, think about packaging it in a way that's relevant to them. Also think about, how do I package that information? Sorry if you guys hear my dog barking in the background. Then you have to think about, how do I package it in a way that leverages the universal language of business? It has to refer to dollars, whether it's revenue, whether it's risk, reputation, it's upside. You have to be able to figure out how to be able to position it so that it's a financial conversation versus an NPS or CSAT or any other. One thing I didn't really talk about, but as you build that approach in terms of convincing somebody else about an initiative that's important for them, you are also bringing them on as an ally. Because what you start to do is you make them look really successful. If you can help the marketing department lower their CAC, that person in the marketing department, that leader, is going to be behind you, and they're going to support you whenever you come into another meeting and you say, hey, I've got an idea to do something else. That person will support you because you've helped them look good. So think about, when you come into some of these, if it's done in a meeting setting, think about bringing some of those allies with you and bringing them on board where it makes sense, so that you can help get support for your idea. Because this was one of my favorite TED Talks of all time, was it's actually the leader is not the most important person in a conversation. It is the first follower. The first follower is the person who indicates that the leader isn't just a crazy idea person, but actually somebody worth following. So when you bring allies, you're bringing a first follower to your conversation who can jump onto your idea and demonstrate to the rest and signal to the rest that what you want to do is a worthwhile project to do. And then last but not least, and I didn't spend a lot of time talking about this, On the emotion side, in addition to leveraging emotions when it comes to the people you're trying to convince, think about also packaging the problem in an emotional way or the opportunity in an emotional way. What I used to do from a contact center perspective was I would start to take complaints and I would actually play them out loud. And they would hear the phone call and they would hear the problem that the customer was having. And rarely did it have anything to do with the agent. It had to do with either a product that we had or it had to do with the delivery of that product. And they could hear the pain and it would make everybody in the room squirm and get really uncomfortable. And very quickly thereafter, the initiative that I had said would solve that problem got executed and got done. So those are the tactics that I have experienced as being valuable and helpful. I'd love to hear from anybody else in terms of what they've experienced as being helpful and valuable. And again, happy to answer any question.
Yeah, Michelle, I do have one question for you. In your experience, because customer experience, I guess, is a fairly new term. So, and I apologize, Nathan, I didn't see your hand up. So, but in your experience, how well defined is that when people talk customer experience? Do you find that organizations kind of universally understand what that means, or is it still kind of loosely defined and they see it as like, account management type thing?
So it's one of my greatest pain points. It very much depends upon the lens that people are looking at it as. I do not think customer experience is well defined and well understood. My definition of customer experience, and the very classic definition of customer experience, is managing the emotion of the customer through every single touch point in the organization. So it's exceptionally broad. It's everything from awareness building all the way through to loyalty, and eventually advocacy is what you want. And the problem that I see is that when people say customer experience, what they really mean is customer service, which to me is the reactive part.
Yep.
Or they think about customer success and they think about let me figure out how to manage a client that already exists.
And upsell, cross-sell. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, Wayfair was a classic example. I was head of post-order customer experience. I inherently knew when I came into the role that because of the title, they had no understanding of what customer experience is, because there is no post-order customer experience. It's all part of the customer experience. And so I do think that is a significant challenge. Look, I'm on a mission and I haven't quite started this movement yet. But as somebody pointed out, that it is a great TED Talk. So if anybody wants to jump on the bandwagon of this movement, I do think we need a rebranding. Customer experience has actually, as a term, been around for a pretty long time. It got a bad rap about 2 years ago because of the problem that we're surfacing here, which is 57% of CX execs and leaders can't demonstrate ROI for what they want to do. And because of that, CX has gotten a bad reputation. But I think fundamentally, CX is mission critical to organizations. Everyone's determined that, whether it's McKinsey or Deloitte or whomever else. Well-executed customer experience is the core differentiator. Really, the core differentiator is culture and then employee experience, which then trickles into customer experience. But Zappos, right, highly commoditized product that they're selling. They're shoes, for crying out loud. Anybody could sell shoes. The culture of the organization and ultimately how that translated into their customer experience is what defined them and differentiated them and created a competitive moat that was so deep and wide that nobody could beat them, and Amazon acquired them. So to your question, the short answer is no, I don't think it's well understood what customer experience truly is. And I think that's part of the education curve that needs to happen at the C-level as well.
We also have a hand up from Nathan as well.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Sure can.
Where did customer service report at Wayfair?
Into operations.
Okay. Did that affect your silo, so to speak, that you pointed out earlier?
So it did a little bit. So the marketing part, the sales part of the contact center reported into marketing. And I've seen that construct in a variety of organizations where they say that the sales piece of contact center sits within marketing, and then the service piece sits within operations. The way we were able to pull that thread through was by taking, again, looking at the data and being able to demonstrate that because some of the expectation setting that was happening on the acquisition side, how marketing was presenting a product, the information that they were presenting to the customer, the information they were choosing not to present to the customer, that had an impact upon operations. And we got much closer alignment between us as a group. Did I answer your question, Nathan?
Yeah. Yep. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments?
No, this was really, really good, Michelle. Really helpful.
I'm glad you found it valuable. And Mark, look, reach out at any time if you want to talk more specifically about if you've got people that have different points of view on the data or present data in a different way than maybe the truth, I'll call it. I'm happy to have that conversation. I've certainly struggled through that one myself as well.